Several let me give you a few remarks. We've given you a paper bag at the entrance. Toda a gente tem a paper bag?
Acho que
Em
sim.
princípio sim, não é?
Mas onde é que está a fita, a dita cuja?
Está aqui.
Ah, ok.
We've given you a paper bag at the entrance containing food and other items. These will be important during the talks, so I would ask you to please not eat them right away. We will tell you when to use them during the talks. Hello everyone, good evening and welcome to the Champalimaud Center for the Unknown and to yet another our event. So my name is Nuno Loureiro, I'm a PhD student here at the Neurobiology of Action Lab, and together with Hedi and Vitória Brugada, we will be your hosts for the night. So we've been cooking this event for quite some time, and I hope you are as excited as we are about it. Tonight you'll be hearing about the links about kitchen and science and how one can help the development of the other. And to start with, I would like to show you the menu for the night. So for starters, Hedi and Vicky, they will be telling us how our food preferences can be influenced by our biology, but also how our culture, our environment, actually helps shaping them during or throughout our lives. We will then have Professor Charles Spence coming from University of Oxford, and he will tell us how our eating preferences are actually dependent on the 5 senses and not just taste, and also how that knowledge can help us develop new and creative foods and products. We will then screen a film that we have shot here at the Champalimaud and in Loco's restaurant, where we've asked Chef Alexandre Silva and our neuroscientist Carlos Ribeiro to swap roles for one day and tell us what is the experience, what are the differences and similarities between science and cooking. And finally, we will have a debate in the end where you'll be able to ask all your questions and discuss the topics that you found interesting and the ones that you feel that we have left out. So for that, we can already say you have these contacts, so we can either send an SMS to that number or the email. We'll gather those questions, and at the end, we will ask them to the speakers. Okay? So before I call Hedi and Vicky on stage, let me just give you a few remarks. So you've been given a paper bag at the entrance that contains a bunch of food and other items, and we would ask you to not eat them right away. So these are going to be important for the rest of the evening. We have prepared a few surprises for you. And of course, these are quite common foods. You'll find them quite common, but I want to emphasize that if you have any allergies or if you have any restrictions or intolerance to some ingredients, please do not eat them. As an example, if you're gluten intolerant, please do not eat the cookie. I think that should be quite explicit, right? All right. And so I don't want to bother you too much. I'm not the one here to talk today. So without further ado, let me introduce my colleagues, Hedi and Vicky. So Hedi is a PhD student in the cortical circuits lab, and is interested in the connections in the brain and how different parts of the brain talk to each other. However, Hedi is not, or does not just have a passion for science. He's actually a food lover, and he has dined in some of the greatest restaurants in the world. And then we have Vicky. So Vicky is a PhD student at the Collective Behavior Lab, where she's trying to understand to what extent we believe that our movements are our own, and she's doing this in a virtual reality setting. But of course, there's a food part to it, and Vicky is an extraordinary cook and a baker, and she has baked some of the best cakes and cookies that I've ever tasted. And so, you're in for a night, and I would like to help me welcome Hedi to the stage, please.
Thank you, Nuno, for that introduction, and good evening, everyone. So, in science, we try to understand the world and the universe around us. And we try to discover the fundamental laws of nature. And until recently, I believed one of the most deep and profound fundamental laws that all human beings obeyed was this one. Everybody loves chocolate, right? Now, I say until recently because I met these remarkable individuals here at Champalimaud who told me they didn't like chocolate. And naturally, I did not believe them. So I went to my favorite chocolate shop here in Lisbon, in Príncipe Real, Bettina and Nicolo Corallo, for a bar of what for me is the best chocolate I've ever had. And they still hated it. So I came to the only logical conclusion that was possible. These people were not humans, they were aliens disguised as humans. And as I lay awake at night worrying about how the Champalimaud had been infiltrated by aliens, it struck me that it makes sense that aliens don't like chocolate because they have a different biology to us. And maybe the reason why we have different taste preferences is because we have different biologies. So this led me to this question, which is our biology important for our food preference? Now, believe it or not, we actually develop food preferences before we are even born. A 2-month-old fetus starts to develop taste buds, and a 4-month-old fetus can actually detect flavors in the amniotic fluid and swallows more amniotic fluid if it tastes sweet and less if it tastes bitter. So even in our mother's wombs, we already have a preference for sugary drinks. And this preference continues in the newborn. Here we see typical images of a newborn baby consuming bitter and sweet solutions. And you can see the response to the bitter solution. The baby its nose is wrinkling, it's frowning, and in response to the sweet solution, it's smiling. And this preference continues on into childhood. I'm just going to show you a clip here of children tasting very sour, acidic-tasting crisps, and these reactions might be familiar to the parents amongst you. Now, as you saw there, even the dog had the same behavioral response. So this behavioral response to these very sour crisps seems to be conserved across species. And our biology can actually cause our taste preferences to change even as adults. As you may know, pregnant women often experience sudden cravings for particular foods such as pickles and potato chips, which have a high salt content. And this isn't true in mammals only, it's also true in flies. And work here done in the laboratory of Carlos Ribeiro has shown that there's a direct positive correlation between the amount of salt consumed and the number of eggs produced. Not just that, they've actually found the mechanism behind this. And turns out, during mating, the male fly injects a molecule called sex peptide, and this molecule activates neurons in the female's uterus, which then sends a message to her brain to tell her to dial up her salt intake. Now, from these examples, it seems that biology plays an important role in our attractions and aversions to different foods, all of which begs the question, why? Well, turns out that evolution has actually shaped our basic tastes over millions of years to help us to survive and to reproduce. As you saw in the previous slide, salt intake during pregnancy is good when producing offspring. Also, our attraction to sweet foods helps us get foods that are rich in sugars, a source of energy. Our attraction to the umami or savory taste helps us get proteins and amino acids to help our body grow and maintain itself. On the other hand, our aversion to bitter foods helps us to avoid poisonous plants, and our aversion to acidity helps us to avoid spoiled foods such as rotten meat, which can carry dangerous bacteria. Now, just as a note, some of our responses to these tastes are context dependent. For example, in the case of sourness, sourness can actually be desirable in the context of fruit flavors and help us get the essential nutrient vitamin C. So we all experience these basic tastes, but some of us experience these tastes more than others. And this brings us to the interesting class of people known as supertasters. And now we're just going to conduct a little experiment to find out who amongst you are supertasters. So I'd like to invite you to take a paper strip, which you'll find in your bags. It's attached to your bags with a paper clip, like so, this paper clip. And I'd like to invite you to put it in your mouths, and you can tell me what you think afterwards. And if anyone doesn't have a paper clip, put your hands up and someone will help you. Okay, yeah, so just to be clear, you have this paper strip which is attached by a paper clip to your bags, and just take it out and put it in your mouths and let me know what you think. Okay, so everyone, can those of you who found the taste to be extremely bitter, please put your hands up? Okay, that's a good deal of you who did that. For those of you who couldn't taste anything, could you please put your hands up? It almost seems to be 50-50, no? So, the people who found the taste to be extremely bitter, that means you might well be a supertaster, because that strip contains a bitter substance called PTC, which supertasters are extremely sensitive to. And around 25% of us are actually supertasters. So why might this be? Well, supertasters have a larger number of papillae on their tongues, and papillae are where the taste buds are located. They also have a different form of the bitter taste receptor gene. And this might have implications for one's diet and one's health. People have found that supertasters are less likely to smoke or consume alcohol, and also they are less likely to eat better tasting but healthy vegetables too. Now, I have a cat at home, and it's constantly trying to steal my food except for my dessert. And I was curious to find out why this might be, and it turns out that cats have actually lost the ability to taste sweet foods, which is no surprise because they are, after all, carnivores. And often cat foods contain a good degree of carbohydrates, which might be contributing to the prevalence of diabetes in cats. And the reason why cats can't taste sweet foods is because they lack a sweet taste receptor. And the reason why we're able to taste sweet foods, or any other taste for that matter, is because we have taste receptors on our tongues. Food molecules bind to these receptors, and that causes a nerve signal to be sent to the brain. And this leads us to our next point, which is that our perception of taste is not formed on our tongues, but rather in our brains. And researchers have identified in the mouse brain bitter and sweet taste areas, just 2 millimeters apart. And remarkably, they have managed to activate these different taste areas in the mouse brain. And they've been able to trick the mouse into thinking it's tasting something bitter or sweet when it's not. So here we have two mice. They are both drinking plain water, but the mouse on the right is having its bitter taste area activated. So let's see what happens. And I'm playing this video in a loop. So you can see the mouse on the right stops licking, and it looks like it's trying to remove that unpleasant taste. And they've actually done these same experiments in mice that have never tasted bitter or sweet in their lives, and they found the same response, which suggests that our attraction or aversion to different foods can be hardwired and independent of learning and experience. Now, these bitter and sweet taste areas talk to other parts of our brains, where ultimately how much we enjoy a food is thought to be determined. And one such area is the orbitofrontal cortex. And researchers at Oxford have done a study in humans to see if there are brain differences between chocolate cravers, those who love the taste of chocolate, and non-cravers, those who are indifferent. And they've actually found that in chocolate cravers, this part of the brain is more active when they're tasting and seeing chocolate. Not only that, they actually find that the more active this area is, the more they enjoy the chocolate. And this positive correlation is not seen in non-cravers. So the next time you meet someone who tells you they don't like chocolate, it's probably not because they're an alien, they probably just have a different brain to you. And without further ado, I'm going to pass you on to Vicky, who's going to show you the other side of the coin.
Thank you, Hedi. That was extremely interesting. But it's true, I'm here to tell you that there's actually a little bit more to this story. So, otherwise, how would you explain people like me that some years ago didn't like chocolate and now I cannot live without it? So, there are many reasons why our taste can be learned. And these reasons can include, for example, our culture, where we are born, the experiences we have with food, or even social influence itself. And to illustrate how social influence can have an effect in our food choices, I'm going to talk to you about the Coke versus Pepsi challenge. This challenge was actually a campaign launched by Pepsi because they wanted to prove that actually Pepsi tastes better than Coke. I don't know if you agree, but they wanted to test it. And what they did is they called people and they made them choose between two glasses. One glass had Coke and the other glass had Pepsi, even though they did not tell them which glass was which. And when asked people to choose which one they preferred, it turned out that actually, when they chose only by taste, many people preferred Pepsi. But that doesn't explain why Coke is leading the market sale in the industry. So some researchers did a follow-up to this, and they first started with the challenge itself. They gave two glasses, one of them had Coke, one of them had Pepsi, and they made people choose. In this case, what they found is that there was no difference. So half of the people preferred Coke, or the glass that had Coke, and half of the people preferred the glass that had Pepsi. So there was no preference here. So what would happen if you actually tell people about the brand that you're drinking? So they tested the following. They told people, okay, this glass has actually contained Pepsi, but the other glass can have either Coke or Pepsi. And the researchers saw the same thing. There was no preference. Half of the people preferred the glass that they knew had Pepsi, and half of the people preferred the other glass. And then they did the same, of course, with the other side. What happens when you tell people that one of the glasses has Coke and the other glass could either be Coke or Pepsi? And here's what they found. But there's more to it. Actually, both glasses had Coke. So this was only because they knew the brand, because they weren't making this choice due to the taste itself, but because they thought they knew that they were drinking Coke. So this is an example of how the food preferences that we have can be shaped by other factors that may not include taste itself. And this shaping can start as early as before we are born. When in the womb, as Hedi has told you, the fetus swallows the amniotic fluid, and this amniotic fluid actually has compounds that derive from what the mom is eating. So when the baby swallows this amniotic fluid, it starts tasting all these flavor compounds. And this also happens during breastfeeding. So another group of researchers tested if that was actually the case. We are scientists, we need to test this stuff. So they called pregnant women into the lab, and they divided them into 3 groups. The first group had to drink carrot juice for 4 times a week for the last 3 weeks of pregnancy, and they didn't have to drink it during breastfeeding. The second group, it was the other way around. They didn't drink it while pregnant, but they had to drink it while breastfeeding the baby. And the third group did not drink the carrot juice, and this was the control group. When the babies stopped breastfeeding and started eating solid foods, they gave him the possibility they wanted to see whether they would like more carrot-flavored cereal because they had been exposed to carrots, or plain tasting cereal. And what they found was the following. The babies of the moms that were drinking the carrot juice during pregnancy had a very, very strong preference for this carrot-flavored cereal, and they seemed to like it a lot, actually. The second group had also a preference, but it was not as strong. And the third group had no preference at all, and they seemed actually not to like this cereal when they had to eat it. So it seems that there may be something there. What the mom is eating is affecting what the baby will like later on. To go a step further, another group did a study in mice. The setting was the same. They had 2 groups, a mice that had a normal food, and ones that had food that tasted like mint. And when they tested the offspring, they saw the same results. The offspring of the moms that had eaten the mint flavor during pregnancy had a very strong preference to mint. And the good thing about working with mice is that can actually see what's going on in the brain. And when they looked at it, they focused on a specific region of the area that responds to smell, and that more specifically responds to mint smell, they saw that there were differences between the mice that preferred mint and the mice that did not prefer the mint, so because they had more cells in this particular region. So yes, what the mom is eating seems to be shaping the future preferences of the offspring, but this is not the only thing that can shape our food preferences. Another reason is where we grow up to. So you know that there's a wide range of cuisines around the world, and most of them taste different, and they have different flavors. And it's not only about the flavors they use, and it's also about the combination that they make with these flavors. For example, it's common to have just a little bit of cinnamon with your pastel de nata, because here in our Western cultures, it's common to pair this cinnamon with sweet dishes, and that's why it's often found in desserts. But in other regions, it's considered a savory spice, and it can be found in curries, for example. But it's not only about the flavors. It also involves the ingredients that they use. And the ingredients are often shaped by history and culture, and that's why sometimes what is considered very good in one culture can be considered not so good in another one. And here is where I need your help. I'm not going to make you taste anything, but I need you, by a show of hands, tell me who would try this delicious dish? Yeah. Okay. Then I actually was expecting you to like it, because now I can tell you that, would you still eat it if you knew that this was the main ingredient? This is actually called escamole, and it's a dish from Mexico that is made with ant larvae. And even though insects are common in some cuisines, it's not very common to us to find them in our dishes. But the day may come when most of us would have to eat insects, because they are actually growing in popularity, and they have been shown to be beneficial in many aspects, for example, even for the environment. But for those of us that it seems impossible to eat, for example, ant larvae, you don't have to worry, because the brain has some mechanisms to help you with that if the day comes. But, okay, so let's stop talking about insects and talk about something that all of us might be familiar with. There are other examples of foods that we learn to like, and actually we shouldn't like. For example, beer, coffee, dark chocolate, and vegetables. And as all of these foods have actually a bitter compound in them, and as Hedi has told you, bitter, it usually is a signal of danger for the brain, and it would make you avoid bitter flavor, bitter tastes. So why do we eat them? Why are these things part of our daily life? And it's because normally they are paired with positive experience, with memories, because all our friends are eating them or drinking them, because we are trying to eat healthier, or even because it's what keeps us awake on a Monday morning. So these positive associations tell the brain that actually these foods might be not so bad, and that have some good things. But while the brain is busy making these positive associations, trying to understand why foods that should be harmful are actually paired with this positive experience, there are other mechanisms that also are going to help you to make this bitter taste less unpleasant. So another group of scientists made this study in the lab. They wanted to see how the bitter aversion to a bitter taste changes just because you are repeatedly exposed to a bitter diet. So they had a group of mice that was for a while on a bitter diet, so they were exposed during various days to these bitter foods. And after that, and before that, they tested how much they liked a little bit of bitter mixed in their drinks. And the way they did it is by mixing quinine, which is it has a bitter taste, and is actually what you found in your tonic water. So when they tested this, they found the following. So here you can see how different concentrations of this compound mixed in the water. So this is mildly bitter water, and this is very, very bitter water, and they measured how much water they drank. Before the diet, you can see that at very high concentrations, mice didn't care for the water. It's like, no, this is bitter, I don't want this. But at low concentrations, they were drinking some of it. But when they checked what happened after this diet, again, at very high concentrations, they did not care for it. But you can see that there's actually a difference. Even though they were still liking it, they were liking it more than before the diet. So this means that their sensitivity to this bitter taste was changing because they had been exposed during some time to this diet. So you see here that I'm talking that actually it took a while. They had to be eating this bitter diet for some days. But it's amazing how fast the brain learns to dislike some foods because of one bad experience. And this may have happened to you, and if you haven't, you can consider yourself lucky, but it happened to me once in my favorite Chinese restaurant in Barcelona, this is where I'm from, and it's where we go always with my family. And one day we went there, and then we went home, and as I was coming down with the flu, that night I felt very, very sick. But it had nothing to do with the food, it was only that I was having a flu. But then I could never go back to that restaurant without feeling sick when looking at the dish I had. So I don't know if it happened to you, but it makes me feel a little bit more calm than to know that it actually happened to mice too. So another group of researchers tested in the 50s if this was actually paired with a particular flavor or it was just by chance. So what they had some mice, and they tested if they preferred water with nothing or water with a little bit of saccharin, which make it sweeter. Of course, all the mice prefer the water with saccharin because, as Hedi has told you, that means that they are a little bit more energetic. Then they made 3 groups of mice, and they exposed them to different levels of radiation, which made them feel nauseous. There was a first group of mice that had no radiation, so they were okay, and a group of mice that were exposed to a very high radiation, so they were feeling very sick, and an intermediate that felt a little bit sick, but not as much as the other ones. And all of these, well, they could only drink water with saccharin, not plain water, just water with sugar. And when they retested again these mice for their preference, the mice that had been feeling very sick because of the radiation did not drink as much water as before, while the ones that did not feel sick drank the same amount. But you can tell me, but that doesn't show that it was because of the water of saccharin. I have the answer for you. Because these researchers also tested the mice while being radiated, but only when drinking plain water. And you can see that actually their preference for saccharin did not change. So this means that when these animals were feeling sick, they were actually associating this unpleasant experience with the flavor of the sweetened water. So it can be for good, it can be for bad, because you had a good experience with one meal or a bad experience with one, but this is also shaping your food preferences. And actually, after telling you all this, I hope you know why maybe it's possible for someone like me to stop being an alien and now become a normal person that works around the CCU. But, so now the next time your child tells you that doesn't want to eat their vegetables, even though you keep telling them they are good for them, now you can still tell them, I know that you can learn them. And with that, I would like to thank you for being here and enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thank you, Vicky.
Thank you.
So I hope you're having fun. I hope you're learning a lot of new, interesting stuff. I'd like to remind you that we can get all your questions from this number and this email. So if you have any questions regarding the presentations that we just had, please just forward them to these contacts. And now I would like to introduce Professor Charles Spence. He's coming from the University of Oxford, where he's an experimental psychologist and where he heads the cross-modal research laboratory. So his lab is interested in understanding on how our brains process the information from different senses, just like smell and taste, to form multisensory experiences that fulfill our daily lives. With this knowledge, with this information, he then designs new products, foods, experiences, interfaces to the daily lives. And he consults with several multinational companies to advise on different aspects of design, packaging, and branding. He's also worked with several high top chefs, which you probably know. For example, Aston Blumenthal at the Fat Duck. And he has published hundreds of papers in top scientific journals, as well as received enormous awards, among them the 2008 Ig Nobel Prize for Nutrition for his groundbreaking work on Sonic Crisp. Finally, Charles is also the author of the book Gastro-physics, which I am sure you will have the opportunity to hear more about during this talk. So please help me welcome Charles to the stage.
Okay, so I promise there'll be no more nasty experiences. But I am not the chef, nor much of a cook. So the foods we have to play with are very sort of simple, everyday produce, things you might buy, as we heard, from the supermarket. No, great, pleasurable tastes, but hopefully that maybe illustrates some of the points that I want to share, and that which will hopefully build on some of what we've heard so far about the biology and the environmental kind of conditioning of taste, preferences, and importantly the role of culture in putting us in different taste worlds. And that's all research that's sort of captured in this book, Gastro-physics, a strange word, doesn't really exist until recently. A book that's all about the new science of eating, I would like to say. And it comes about by a combination of gastronomy on the one side, nice food experiences like this dish from Kitchen Theory, a young science-minded chef from London called Pollen and the Bee, all about trying to get us to eat more of the insects that we're going to have to eat sooner or later. But it looks beautiful, it tastes beautiful, and there's a message behind it. And the way the dish has been created is based on some of the emerging science of taste and of flavor perception. So there have been food scientists for 50, 80, 100 years, but they mostly work on frozen Brussels sprouts. You know, you have to go in every Monday and taste the same thing for a year, or my favorite example of the frozen chicken breast, where they would vary how much fish meal you fed to the chickens to see whether you detect it on the breast meat or not, every day for a year, or every week for a year. Having that is not pleasant. It is science, and it is about food. It is important, but it's not the kind of research that we are most interested in Oxford. It's the nice food experiences, the memorable, the shareable, the ones you want to return to talk about and savour, in anticipation as well as in memory after having eaten. And we want to study that using sort of scientific skills. I come from a psychology, neuroscience background. So you want to use psychophysics, that's the physics part, which is kind of a branch of psychology. Normally it's people sitting in front of computer screens, pressing buttons, and you throw lots of stuff at them, lots of stimuli, and sort of measure how they respond, what do they perceive. Not relying so much on what they say and on introspection, but trying to sort of force their decisions to answer questions of interest. So in the middle there, at the bottom, you see the kind of question we might address with that psychophysics, the branch of psychology. We're interested in a wine glass. Is it worth paying €100 for a wine glass? And a different wine glass for each grape variety, as some would have us believe? And if there is a difference to be had, does it reside in the chemistry, in the physics, in the glass, or in your mind? And here we have our subject in the science lab. We've blindfolded them so they can't see the glass. The glass is agitated, so you lift the aromas from the surface of the wine. You can't see it, you can't feel the glass. Under those conditions, does it make a difference? It turns out it does not. As soon as you can see the glass, as soon as you can hold the glass, it makes the world of difference. But the fact that those two conditions differ so much tells you that probably the pleasure to be had from matching the glass to the grape resides as much in the mind as in the glass or the mouth. This is somebody in a very scientific experiment exposed to food stimuli, but they're not enjoying themselves. That's not the way that we normally drink wine. So wherever possible, we try and go to the real world too, as you see in the bottom right, and do experiments in restaurants, coffee shops, bars, science festivals, food festivals, with audiences such as yourself. That's real world. Noisy environments. People are out for their birthday. They're celebrating. Food might be the last thing on their mind. But if we can show that the wine glass matters there too, then I think we have enough evidence to bat away critics who say of the real world research, well, it's not very scientific, is it? Maybe they liked the wine because Portugal won the World Cup or it was sunny outside. How do you know what really was driving behavior? So it's ecologically valid, but it's not as easy to scientifically control. By contrast, in the lab, it's very easy to scientifically control everything if you're careful. It's just not ecologically valid. So you need the two sides wherever possible to say this is a factor that matters and take the attention away from the food itself more towards the total experience, both on and off the plate or out of the glass. But why? Why do we need it? Why do we need gastrophysics? Why do we need another science of food? Isn't food wonderful already? There are amazing chefs, we'll hear about later, doing wonderful things with cuisine. And maybe we've had 3 decades or so of science in the kitchen. Molecular gastronomy, modernist cuisine. It's brought us spumes and foams and rotovaps and anti-griddles. Food as we could never have imagined it before. It's taken us a long way. You can love it or not. And it's definitely science and food together, but it's a science solely in the kitchen. And my point is, I think it's time to think about the science of the dining room, of those sitting there tasting the food. And it's not just myself saying this. Other chefs, who mentioned Henston Blumenthal as one influential figure who've realized they need to know what's going on in the mind of those that they serve. It's not enough just to be a good chef, a great chef, in charge of your ingredients, your seasonality, and your storytelling. You need to know what's in here at each and every table to deliver the best, the most memorable, the most enjoyable stuff. And this is the dish that, for the soon-to-be world's top chef, made him realize, Heston Blumenthal, that he needed to know about the mind and not just the mouth. This is the dish. You see it. You can't taste it, but you can already imagine what it would taste like, what the flavor might be. It's probably not going to be a sour ice cream. It's probably ice cream. It's probably fruity, sweet, maybe red fruits. I know I like it. Well, somewhere in my brain's telling me it's probably not so good for me. I'd have to go to the gym afterwards to work it off. But I like it. All those thoughts go through each and every one of our minds as soon as that picture came up. Because that's what our brains have in part evolved for, the foraging, the finding food, and the predicting of which foods out there have the taste properties or the nutritional properties that I want. Because it's not really enough, well, taste Gustation, what's going on in the tongue, is very important. I don't want to have to taste everything in order to know whether it will be good or not, nutritious or not. I'd rather make predictions based on what I see. So in this case, it turns out this was a dish created by the soon-to-be world's top chef, Heston Blumenthal, served in his restaurant when a dish is somewhere between the research kitchen and a regular menu item. He thought it was perfectly seasoned. He served it to his regular guests, eating in his restaurant. All the cues are right. And they went, ugh, I don't like it. It's really salty. How can the world's top chef make something that he thinks is perfect that his diners do not like? That's the question. In this case, it turns out that your predictions based on the color of that dish are wrong. This is not a sweet ice cream, it's a savory ice cream. It could be frozen crab bisque or smoked salmon ice cream. The color is perfect, the color is natural, it's just didn't set the expectations, the right expectations in your mind. And if you approach this thinking it's going to be sweet and it actually tastes salty, there's a disconfirmation of expectation. It's a bad place to be. Your brain has got it wrong, it has not predicted the world, and you do not like the dish then. You say it's very salty, and you don't like it weeks after, even when you know what it really is. That first exposure, as we just heard, sets subsequent taste preferences and behaviors. So what's to be done? It's not just enough to have the best taste buds on the planet. You need to think about the mind, the expectations of your diners. And in this case, in research between the University of Sussex in the south of England, Martin Yeomans, and the chef Heston Blumenthal, and others, they were able to show that if you serve this ice cream and call it a savory ice, or you call it Food 386, that is enough for diners to taste it, and to taste it as the chef intended, and say it's delicious. It's perfectly seasoned. The food has not changed. All that's changed is in the expectation in the mind of the diner from terrible, it's oversalted, to perfectly seasoned and enjoyable dish. Now, this is some fancy restaurant on the other side of the English Channel. It's expensive, it's hard to get into, it's sort of esoteric, it's not the food for most of us. And maybe one might think, I don't really care what the top chefs do, I'm never going to eat there, it doesn't apply to me. That's a criticism we are sensitive to, but I think some of those top chefs, many of those top chefs, are wonderful at taking the science that inspires or interests them, and at turning it into dishes that are delicious, that are wonderful, that are memorable. And also, it's kind of like a Formula One, really. Science and innovation, I think, happens much faster in these kitchens and restaurants than it does perhaps in a large food organization. So you want to see what happens there and then think about how to play it out. And in this case, what this dish told the chef was that the pleasures of the table reside mostly in the mind, not in the mouth where we actually localize them. But it's the high-end restaurant, so I need to convince you that what was found there, discovered and studied there, applies to all of us wherever we eat, whatever we eat. And truth be told, virtually always a dish has a name, a description, a brand, a label. And those labels, again, set expectation. Freshly prepared, seasonal, regional, whatever it might be, Coke or Pepsi. And by knowing about the power of naming, it's not part of the flavor of a dish, but it does fundamentally change our food behavior, or it can. And here's the best everyday example, the Patagonian toothfish. Imagine yourself going to some restaurant and seeing that on the menu. It's been there for decades. But people will say, no, maybe I'll have a burger or the steak or something else instead. It doesn't sound appealing. I can show you the picture, but it's an ugly brute. It's nutritious, it's sustainable, it's healthy, it presses all the right buttons, it's just no one would eat it. Until some clever marketeer a few years ago figured out that the thing to do was to rename it, change the name, like the ice cream, call it Chilean sea bass, and sales in restaurants in the UK, in North America, in Australia and beyond increased by 1,200%, simply as by an act of naming. So I think the same rules do apply, be it getting people to eat the sustainable fish, or be it getting your kids to eat their vegetables. Part of the answer may be about how you name them, and you may take insights from what the top chefs are doing in their restaurants and apply them elsewhere. So a lot of our work is it's about taste and it's about flavor, but really I'm most interested in the other senses, everything but the taste buds. So a lot of our work is done online. This is just one drink that we showed to people in the Science Museum in London as part of the Cravings exhibition for a year and a half, about a year ago. Is it sweet or sour? Simple, prediction. Your brain is seeing that drink, and we find that no matter which continent you come from, nor really your age doesn't matter, most people will say that's going to be sweet. So your brain's making a prediction based on colour, perhaps picking up on the regularities of the environment, because we heard you crave, you like, you want the sweetness, I don't want to taste everything, but if I can pick up on the correlation that most fruits out there go from green, sour, and unripe to riper and sweeter and more full of energy, then I can predict about which trees to climb, and hence it's a good correlation of the world to pick up on and say, okay, that looks like it's going to be sweet to me. And that expectation will then change your taste perception. So the colour of food is not part of the flavour, according to psychologists and the philosophers, but it does change the experience. Not just in you or I, but also in the experts. Here we have the wine expert. And surely you think the wine expert, they write so much about wines and the origins and the grapes and the pairings and so on, they wouldn't be fooled by a simple trick like adding red colouring to a white wine. But of course they are. Work from French enology students in Bordeaux, work from New Zealand winemakers, from Wendy Parr and colleagues in New Zealand. And recently we did a study with 200 sommeliers, wine professionals in Barcelona, serving white wine coloured pink, so it looks like a rosé, and lo and behold, the more expert you are in wine tasting, the more that colour means to you. That's 7 or 8 years old, it was a hot summer, the wine's been over-extracted. You can read that from the colour in a way that the social drinker can only say red or white, nothing more. So it's the experts in this case who are in fact more influenced by what they see driving their taste perception. Well, we don't have any wine for you here. That's a little bit hard to get into the bags. But I can show you by analogy, a lot of our work is taking understandings, insights, models, and theories from easy-to-study senses, like hearing and vision, and applying them to harder-to-study senses, like flavour perception, where your subjects might be full up, or they might be allergic to something, all sorts of problems. And I think the analogy here, perhaps, is from the McGurk effect. If you look at the face you see on the left of the screen and just think about what you hear going into your ears, you'll probably hear a ba, ba, ba. Then look at the face you see on the right of the screen and say, what's going in your ears now? And it's da all of a sudden. Da. Now, whenever you look to the left, your brain tells you you're hearing one thing. Look to the right, something different. If you close your eyes, you can tell the real sound is a muffled ba. But open your eyes again and look at the face on the right. You cannot stop your brain combining the senses and telling you he is saying something different. This is the McGurk effect, discovered by accident by psychologists in the south of England in the 1970s. But it's an example of vision changing what you hear in much the same way I think that the colour of the wine changes the taste, the flavour, the aromas in the experts, and does so in a way that you cannot unpick. It feels like I can see, I can hear, I can taste, I can smell, but in fact our brain mixes it all together and only gives us the awareness of the result of integration. So that's a party trick maybe. We've fooled a few wine experts with that, but so what? Here we have the young chef Joseph Youssef from Kitchen Theory in London, serving a dish inspired in a way by the science. You can see him preparing it here. It's called the Four Tastes. And it comes to the table like this. 4 spoons with a spherification, so you can't smell anything, and you won't know the taste until you put it in your mouth, and the sphere explodes. It comes to the table, the waitress says, this is the 4 tastes. She puts the spoons down randomly, and she says, the chef recommends that you start with the salty, then you have the bitter spoon, then have the sour spoon, and make sure to end on a sweet note. And then she wanders away, and you're left, but she didn't tell me which one was which. And that's the point of the dish. At the table, you have to rearrange your spoons into the order that you think is salty on the left, bitter next, then sour and sweet on the right. And that becomes an experiment. You're just dining, eating the food, but your rearranging of the spoons feeds into the laboratory research, the online research. So we find that about 75% of people will say that white is salty, browny black, that's probably going to be the bitter one, green, sour, and that pinkish red, sweet. Not everyone agrees, but a majority do. And we've taken this dish now around Mexico, Brazil, other countries, working with local chefs to see whether the same colour-taste associations work wherever you are. So it's kind of at the crossroads of the science feeding into culinary creativity, as it were. Okay, so that's about the sight and the prediction of taste. Now I'd like you to take out what looks like a Skittle. Please put your hand in and just take one of those Skittles out without seeing the colour. I want to be able to smell now.
Okay. In the aluminium foil.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. So you picked your hand in the bag, you picked out, but you don't know which colour of Skittle you've got. I'd like you to hold your nose like you're deep sea diving, and then taste the Skittle in your mouth, and chew, but keep your nose closed. And think about what you taste. And maybe you get sourness, maybe you get a sweet taste, or both, but not much more. But then when you let go of your nose, suddenly you get the fruit flavour, the strawberry, the lemon, the lime, whatever it might have been. So our brain tells us that we taste in our mouth, on our tongues, but in fact 70 to 95% of what we think we're tasting, we're really smelling via this retronasal route. Every time we swallow, we pulse air out of the back of our nose, and that is where most of the flavour resides. It's like a ventriloquist in your mouth. You smell it up here, and your brain ventriloquizes it into your mouth and says, I can taste it there on my tongue. And that has, I think, very important implications, because none of us are really aware how much smell contributes to taste and to flavour and to enjoyment. The tongue, remember, only gives you salty, bitter, sour, sweet, umami, maybe fatty acid, nothing more. But all the things we like in food, the fruity, the floral, the meaty, the creamy, the herbal, all of that's really coming from your nose. And if that's true, then it makes me think at least, are we designing foods in the right way? If most of the pleasure of the meal comes from that retronasal smell, or even from the orthonasal sniff, then shouldn't we be doing more of this? Is this a great way to design a drink? Because I can taste the drink, I can get the liquid into my mouth, but what I singularly can't do is smell. I've lost the majority of the experience. Maybe it makes me drink more, but that's probably not a good thing. Or this, my pet peeve, the coffee cup. Because if you ask people across cultures, what's the favourite smell in the world? Chocolate's up there in number 1 or 2. But coffee, ground coffee, even if you don't like tasting coffee, the smell of ground coffee is irresistible to all but few. So if you have the world's best smelling drink, why on earth would you sell millions of cups of coffee every day with a lid that prevents you from smelling, only allows you to taste? It's kind of crazy design, but it's a space where now designers are working, building on the science to say we can do better than this, we can go beyond our intuitions to make flavour experiences that are built for the way we know the experience combines the senses, the expectations that we have. And then we have this, I couldn't really resist, the potato chip, which you have in your other bag here. And for me, this was my first ever food experiment, more or less, my first ever food experiment. A wonderfully designed thing, I think. It sort of goes in your mouth in a certain way. And if I was thinking carefully about it, I might think my taste buds are on my tongue rather than on my top of my mouth. So if I want the tasty stuff, but the unhealthy stuff to hit my taste buds, surely it should be on the underside where I bite into it, not on the other. And it was this here in Oxford in 2003, where with Max Zampini, we fed hungry undergraduates 2 tubes of these. And you bite into one, and please, how much do I enjoy it? How much do I like it? How fresh is it? These are the questions you'd answer with a line scale. Anytime you bit into one, we'd change the sound you heard in real time, making that crunch louder or quieter, or boosting just the frequencies of sound that the mechanical engineers have spent far too much time measuring when they mechanically crush Pringles with a microphone to see what happens. 2 to 5 kilohertz is a magic range. And when we do that, we can make this Pringle 15% crunchier, 15% fresher, much more enjoyable to eat. That's sort of bizarre, because sound, again, the sound of crunch, any kind of sound, is not part of flavour. Flavour comes from what you taste on the tongue, what you smell, and maybe the trigeminal stimulation. But sound is out of the picture. No one thinks you can taste sound. And yet, we love sonic food. And in the paper title I wish I'd written, or come up with, comes from Science magazine in 2001. Why does nobody like a soggy crisp? Question mark. By Weiss. It's true, isn't it? No one does. But sound doesn't directly signify any nutritional content, so there's something bizarre going on here that needs explaining. Well, maybe it's because, think about those fruits in the trees, maybe the fresher fruits and vegetables preserve more of the nutritional content, and they also make more noise, whereas older fruits and veg become a little bit quieter. Or maybe in the baked food aisle, I just wonder, is it that maybe if I were to correlate the fat content of baked goods, which maybe we can't detect directly, with the sound the food makes, we'd find that higher fat content foods make more noise. I don't know, but it could be the case. But whatever it is, the scientists now have been doing a lot of research with potato chips of this and other varieties, and what they find is the noisier the food, the longer the flavour lingers. Silent foods, we adapt to them, we get bored of them quickly. Noisy foods, we keep enjoying them for longer, and maybe that's why all our snack foods are crispy, crunchy, crackly, and why creamy, squeaky, carbonated. These are all sounds in foods that I think we like, that give pleasure and maybe enhance the experience. And it was in this booth here in 2004 that the chef, Heston Blumenthal, when he first came to Oxford, we were doing the sonic chip experiments, published in a very obscure food journal, so he thought no one would be interested. He came in, he bit the crisp, and suddenly realised sound is the forgotten flavour sense. He then went back to Bray, to the Fat Duck, and after a few iterations came up with this, the sound of the sea, seafood dish. And for you here, it probably doesn't make much sense, but in Bray, near Slough, as far from the English coastline as you can get, if you're serving seafood, you want to try and capture the sounds of the sea. So this dish comes to the table with sashimi, sand, foam, seaweed. Looks like the seashore. And then, on the other hand, the waiter brings the conch shell, out of which dribble the earbuds. He recommends you put the earbuds in, and you hear the waves gently crashing on the beach, the seagulls swarming overhead. And this has been a signature dish on the menu for a decade now. It's still there to this day. It brings some people to tears. You can only imagine what happened to them on a beach once upon a time. But for the rest, it triggers nostalgia, happy childhood memories of the seaside, and we have done the research with the chef in Oxford with oysters, showing that seafood tastes significantly better, but no more salty with this sound than something else. One undiscovered thing that came out is that in the restaurant, diners are going there for their once-in-a-lifetime meal. They're excited. They can't stop talking. It's noisy. They put the earbuds in, and there is silence. Utter silence at that table for 5 minutes as they concentrate on the food, think, is that the sound of my childhood? Do the seagulls sound different? Does it really change the taste? I'm not so sure. But in that sort of focusing, the mindful attention to the food is also part of what makes the dish, I think, taste better. And we thought when we did this, the original seafood experiment, and then when the dish came onto the menu by Heston and his team, that we were the first. No one had done this before. But of course, you never really do anything for the first time. Somebody's already done something before. And in this case, it turns out you can find all the answers to this and many other questions in the Futurist cookbook from the early 1930s. F.T. Marinetti. he was having dinner parties. He was miscolouring foods, like we're doing these days. He was presenting smells over the food, like many chefs are doing these days. He was also playing the sounds of croaking frogs to dinner guests while serving frogs' legs. It's all been done somewhere in the past. His objective was very different. He was trying to perturb, discombobulate his diners. It wasn't about delivering a great experience or triggering nostalgia. So the purpose is different, but maybe the idea stays the same. And that idea that appeared on the menu for the first time in 2007 or 2008, when the chefs first realized that maybe the importance of sound to the dining experience, has then gone global in some small section of the San Pellegrino list here. French chef Paul Paré serving a fish and chips inspired dish in Shanghai in ultraviolet. It's just a tiny little thing, a stuffed caperberry. But it it comes to the table with the sounds of the sea, followed by the sounds of the Beatles, the quintessentially British pop group, with the British flag on the table. And if you didn't know this was a British dish you're eating, he then projects the British weather onto the walls, with raindrops that are bigger than they would be in reality. Why is that? And this is all referencing his time as a non-famous chef in the UK when he first saw himself in a newspaper. He tries to take his diners back. When you ask him, he's got one of the most technologically advanced restaurants in the world. But when you ask him and talk to him, it's not about the technology is only there to allow him as a chef to serve the food à point exactly at the moment it comes out from the oven when he knows it is at its best. So technology there to help the main meal. All this from London with Chef Joseph, one of the dishes on the menu currently. Joseph, like many other chefs, is very interested in sustainability, in nudging us towards better food behaviors, be it insects, be it eating more seaweed, seafood, rather than red meat. And here you can see at the chef's table in London, we have the projection onto the table of the sea. You're eating jellyfish, a very noisy food, it has little taste. We have the sounds of the water in the background. And periodically you hear the crunch of the crisp, or the crunch of something. So you've got the atmospheric sounds of the sea, you're crunching, and occasionally you hear the crunch over the headphones. Your brain tries to make sense. Is that my crunch? Or am I just hearing that crunch? It sort of comes into and out of phase. There we go. Was that me? Or was that the soundtrack? So they're combining different kinds of sound to deliver a message about sustainability. And if this was your first ever jellyfish experience, if it's a nice one, maybe you'll do it again. Working in those restaurants is great, but it can be expensive to do. So very often our research around the role of the environment on tasting happens with branded events with, in this case, whiskey, taking hundreds of people with a glass of whiskey and a scorecard through a 15-minute experience where you start in the top room, you hear the sounds of the English summer, the birds, the lawnmower, buying sheep. There's grass on the wall, on the floor, deck chairs. And we ask you, how grassy does the whiskey smell? How sweet does it taste? And how textured the aftertaste? Then we take you downstairs to the red room in the middle. Your whiskey's still in hand, your scorecard's there. We say again, tell me about the smell, the taste, and the texture of that drink. In this case, we've got tinkling high-pitched music. Why? Because this is sweet. This is not bitter music. We know from our lab and online research. It's not sour music. The colours in the room are specially chosen, the reds and the pinks, the sweetest colours, and the shape of the room, the shape of the window frames, the shape of the poof are all round. So if I ask you, is sweet round or angular? It's round. So to try and convey round sweetness, we have the colours, the shapes, the sounds, all combined. And finally, we take you to the bottom room, the woody room, and we've got the sound of the double bass, the sound of a creaking door, the sound of a log fire, the sound of a walk through the woods. Wood on the floor, wood on the walls, a dead tree behind you. Tell me about the smell, the taste, the texture of the whiskey. 500 people, 4 nights, and the results are clear. The glass hasn't left your hand, and yet you can see from your scorecard that the whiskey tasted different to you, that the environment is impacting you. The grassiness on the nose was higher significantly in the grassy room, the sweetness on the palate in the middle room, and the textured aftertaste of the whiskey in the bottom. And it's from those who went to this event in London who then, in their own restaurants who were serving whiskey, started to do so from a wooden board to try and capture a bit of that, the environment that they enjoyed the food in most. And then we have this. We're talking about sort of the evolution of taste and the brain and tasting. And it turns out that there's nothing that gets our brains more excited than food when we're hungry. Pornography doesn't do it, but gastroporn does, leading this study from Wang and colleagues a 24% increase in cerebral blood flow, the brain, your body's most bloodthirsty organ, excited by the sight of the dish. And I think that has profound implications for the way food experiences are delivered and enjoyed. It may be like this dish you see at the top here from an Israeli restaurant where for all those 30 or 40% of diners who can't help but take a picture of their food and share it on social media, we have a stand in the plate to slot your and then we curve the back of the plate up so that you don't have to see any of the other diners. Perfect shot every time. Maybe that's where the understanding about the brain on food takes us. Or maybe it takes us to this. I mean, if you go to some of the fancy restaurants, you see the chefs doing wonderful, amazing, beautiful presentations. Maybe building on Apicius's idea that we taste first with our eyes. But is that really true? Does food really taste better? If it looks better, that was the inspiration for this dish from a young Franco-Colombian chef, Charles Michel, who recreates Kandinsky's painting 201 out of vegetables and liquidized vegetables and lettuce and a mushroom. And we've been serving that in Oxford. There's the chef with the first pre-proto experiment, 12 Kandinsky salads. And you're eating a painting, so why not serve it from a canvas? And if you're eating a painting, why not eat it with a paintbrush? Because knives and forks are really boring. This is a very sensitive bit of your anatomy, so why not tickle it with a paintbrush? Starts there, but then ends up in the restaurant, in the cafe, in the real-world research, where we have exactly the same ingredients, the Kandinsky-inspired on the left, the tossed salad. It's easy. It's the way it comes in most restaurants. Same ingredients, same food, but you can see the doubling in the willingness to pay, matched by increased enjoyment for the artistically plated dish compared to the other. So it's the creativity of the kitchen put together with the science, the measurement science, that's hopefully helping to improve dish design. There, in person, but also out there on the internet, with chefs like this, Albert Landgraf, from a piece in Sao Paulo. This is his signature dish. It's all over the internet. 3 onions, beautiful to look at. All the onions are lined up. And you ask the chef, why did you plate that dish like that? Because it's your signature dish. It's really important. Is it random? No. Well, I thought about it, and I played a bit, and then that just seemed to be the right one. So that's the way it is served to each and every diner. But if this is your signature image all over the internet, wouldn't you want more evidence on which to base your decision? That this really is the most beautiful presentation. So what we do, with the chef's permission, is take his dish and do what you sometimes do in restaurants when the waiter places the dish down in front of you. You can pick up the plate and sort of tilt it a little bit. Are you taking ownership? Are you putting it into alignment? It won't change the taste. Well, then maybe it will. So what we do on the internet, we put this on the internet and we pay people around the world 6 cents to spin the plate and say, if you were going to the restaurant tonight, how would you like this dish served? We'll give you the money no matter what. I don't know who you are. So maybe just press a button, get your money, and spend it. But it turns out people are not like that. And that within an hour of putting this plate onto the internet, we have 250 people, each dot a person. Wait a couple of days, and we have 2,500 people viewing the chef's plate, figuring out what they prefer the orientation to be. In this case, you can see most of the dots are just past 12 o'clock. The chef said 12. The 2,500 say 3.4 degrees past. Close enough not really to matter in this case, but I could give you other examples where, in fact, the chef's intuitions about plating turn out not to be the most liked. Asymmetric plating, for example, would be one. And finally, on the plating is important, but I think also the plate. So I can't I'm not the cook or the chef or the creative. We think about everything else, the plates, the glasses, the cutlery, the environment. And here, from work with Fran Adria's Alicia Foundation in Spain, was the first time in 2012 that we realized that, well, you can't taste the plate. The color of the plate, the shape of the plate, the texture of the plate can change the tasting experience. Looks like strawberry ice cream. In fact, it's strawberry mousse. We served it to the same people on the same day from the same batch on a black plate, on a white plate. How sweet does it taste? How flavorful? How much do you like it? Questions. It turns out one of those plates makes the dessert taste sweeter. 7% sweeter, 9% more liked, and 13% more flavorful when the strawberry mousse was served on the right plate than on the left. Sort of makes no sense. But now, 6 years later, studies from Taiwan, from Newfoundland, from North America and beyond have all supported the claim that the color of the plate can change taste expectations and then taste experience. And if I can deliver sweetness without the calories, who wouldn't want that? It's not much use to the chef in the top restaurant, because when you go there for your once-in-a-lifetime meal, you don't care about how many calories you're consuming. But for an everyday yogurt, I might want to think carefully about the color of the plate, the bowl, the package, the container. So I'll just leave you with where we are currently, thinking about the sound and the technology and its place at the table. All those gastro-porn images, I'm not sure whether they're a good or a bad thing. But I think we can use technology in a good way, perhaps as sonic seasoning. And this was the idea behind the dish you see here, a dish served in a London restaurant by a culinary artist, Caroline Hopkinson, a bittersweet chocolate lolly. And on the menu it says, this is the sonic cake pop. Take out your mobile device, dial 0845 680 2417 if you want to make your dessert more bitter. Dial a different number on your mobile device if you want to make your dessert more sweet. Here's a diner in a restaurant listening to one of those tracks, and you might think, is that sweet music or is it bitter music? There are no right answers, but we know from the research, the majority of people will say this sounds more bitter than, for example, this. Those tinkling, high-pitched sounds seem to bring out in the lab, in the restaurant, and in the test kitchen about 5% sweetness. Again, sweetness without the calories, and repositioning technology. So I've got just the last couple of little bits and pieces here in your bags, and I wouldn't like you to leave without tasting them for those who haven't yet scoffed them. What have we got? We should have a little green sort of jelly thing. Sort of a sour candy. And now we have music for sweet, we have music for bitter, we have music for spicy, we have music for creamy, salty's hard to get, and we also have music for sour. So I'd like you to taste your sour sweet. You get sort of mouth-puckering sourness. And now when I play this music, we'll find that it brings out the sourness. Not in a good way, but in a way that changes the experience. The sour shape, angular and asymmetric, is the shape of sourness. The sour color, green, a mathematically transformed Argentinian tango, which is the sourest music known to mankind. That's not going anywhere, is it really? But flip that and say, what would happen if we played sweet music all day long? Would that add sonic sweetness and allow us to eat less sugar? That was the idea behind the Jin Cafe in Beijing, where they play music like this, tinkling the high-pitch tracks, so that they can lower the sugar content in their cakes, their pastries, and their drinks, hoping to give you the sweetness you still always crave, but with fewer calories. Again, maybe you can have too much of this as well, but I think the idea is there, potentially, using the insights from the science to help nudge people towards better food behaviors, using the technology to deliver sonic seasoning, to deliver virtual reality food experiences, to take the tablets, the mobile phones, the smartphones, and say what would happen if we started using them as plates. And I'll leave you very finally, we have one ginger biscuit left. And we have 2 bits of material. I recommend you don't eat the velvet or the sandpaper. What I would do is try biting into your ginger biscuit and then rub the sandpaper and then try rubbing the velvet. And this is a very current research where we find with cutlery, with glassware, with plateware, that when you feel the rougher texture, it tends to bring out the gingeriness, the spiciness of the biscuit. By contrast, feeling the softer, the silky, the velvet texture seems to attenuate that. Something that starts out in a very high-end restaurant, like this. This is the fat duck, the final course on the menu, the textured spoon. It's heavier than you expect, because heavy is good. It has a scent, because we're now thinking about scent. It also has texture, and I believe that texture changes the tasting experience. It starts there. We may never touch that spoon, but nevertheless, the insights and the inspiration from the top chefs, followed up, backed up by the science from the lab and from the real world, I think is transforming some of the food experiences in the high end, as I hope to have shown you what starts out there, not in all cases, but in number, is percolating down to the mainstream, to the local cafe, to airline food, to hospital food, and beyond. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for... is this working? Yeah. So thanks a lot for the talk. I hope you save your questions for the end. So we've had quite a few people already sending some of the questions. Please don't hesitate. You can send them in Portuguese or in English, as you will. And now, as I said, the next step is for us to screen a movie that we have recorded here at the Champalimaud Center for the Unknown. And we did kind of an experiment. So we wanted to test, or we wanted to... what happens when you try to change the... Alexandre Silva is the owner and a chef at Local, and you may probably know him best for being the winner of the 2012 competition of Top Chef here in Portugal. And we asked our neuroscientist, Carlos Ribeiro, that has a lab here at the Champalimaud Center for the Unknown, where he heads the Behavior and Metabolism Lab, studying how neurons sense the needs for our metabolism and publishing papers on our neuronal process generate the correct decisions that we need to survive and to reproduce as organisms. So we asked them, okay, so let's take the chef, bring him to the lab, do a couple of experiments with Carlos, and take Carlos, bring him to the local restaurant, and have him prepare some dishes. So what are the experiences that they will find? What are the similarities? What are the differences that they will find among their two jobs? So we did a short video for you to see, and I hope that you enjoy. Thank you. So I hope you've enjoyed the film. This was a work produced by Alexandre, and he's somewhere here in the crowd. So let's have a round of applause to him for the magnificent work he's done. And now I would like to call on stage the 5 speakers that we have, or the 3 speakers and the 2 magnificent actors that were in the movie, to come on stage and to discuss a bit on what we have been talking tonight. So please, come on. And again, please continue to send your questions. I have my phone here to just keep track of everything that you're sending. I will select some of the... You can send it directly to Alexandre. But yeah, send the questions and I will be just asking them. So let's have a nice conversation. So yeah, I would maybe start with you. How did it feel to come? You're just next to me. I think it's easier. But how did it feel to come to a lab? Have you been in the lab before?
No, it's my first experience.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
It's it was my first experience in a lab. In the beginning, it's like awkward moment, but the next minute I being in a lab, it's like being in a kitchen. It's you have a team and you have a method and create a process, and it's like a kitchen. It's the same, I think, but with different results. We taste what we do, and I hope you not taste what you do. But I think it's the same. If you think about it, it's the same.
Carlos, maybe I'll address the same question to you. Well, the reverse of the question to you, let's say.
Well, as I said, I think for us it's less of a alien environment because we all have a kitchen at home, although obviously it's very different than the fantastic place you have at Loco. I think that one thing which at the beginning when we started discussing that, we thought would be very different, which is there's this idea, right, that scientists are very rational and the way we work is by sitting down, thinking a lot, and then doing the logical experiment, which then obviously works, and then we know how it works, right? And that the process in the kitchen is much more of a creative one, and therefore not such a again, not using this logic part. But I think that while I appreciated how much actually Loco also uses systematic research with a research kitchen actually, and so has also this very scientific approach. I think it was also clear that the people in the lab, also we have a very strong creative aspect, right? In which you first have to come up with an idea which you want to test, and there is no evidence for that, right? So if the initial step in a lab is actually the inspirational moment, the moment where you have a moment of an hypothesis, right? That's what we call a hypothesis, which is, couldn't it be that this neuron does make a female eat more salt when she's pregnant? And that is just a hunch you have. And then you go and you test, and then you do actually the scientific part. So I think the fact that both the kitchen and the lab has a mixture of creative aspect of venturing into the unknown, which is the way we call the center, but then also very rigorous follow-up. I think that was something which was interestingly similar, actually, in both places.
Yeah. Cool. So, yeah, you want to add something?
Although I wonder whether in the science side it's more the process should be repeatable, identical, whereas maybe with the chef's dishes I want to feel the hand of the maker in some way. I want that individual touch. Otherwise it could just be a processed meal if it was all sort of perfectly reproducible and measured out. maybe the scientist is less present in their work, whereas hopefully...
Actually, I don't think so. I mean, we all know, right? I mean, when I read a Spence paper, right? I know there's a way people approach problems. I know that scientists come in also with a set of tools, right? I mean, I'm, for example, not a trained neuroscientist. I'm a molecular biologist. And I'm sure that someone who has a more classic psychology background will have a different approach to the same question. Although, as you say, at the end, the experiment has to be reproducible. Everybody has it has to give the same result in different settings. The process, the way you approach the question is actually quite personal. And it comes has your fingerprint as a scientist, right?
And so maybe taking what you just said, so someone has asked if, so you've told us about the experiments that you do in the lab and in the restaurants, but these seem to be always with healthy subjects. Is it true, or do you also do some studies with people with disabilities like blindness or lack of smell or taste? Have you done any of these experiments? Do you see any differences?
Not really as yet. We've tried a bit to work with obese populations and see how their brains respond differently to food cues. Are they driven more by their eyes, or is their olfactory system different? But that kind of research with special groups is kind of harder to do, both to find the populations in some cases you want to test, and then to get the ethics and the approval. So we're currently working with sort of anti-cancer hospital in Barcelona. The project's been going on for 3 years, and we've just got our very first results. So in a way, kind of frustratingly slower to jump through all the hoops that might require. But maybe we're not the only ones, because I think about, isn't it sort of bizarre that 10% of men are colourblind? Show me a paper on the effect of colour blindness on food perception. Doesn't exist. So there are big gaps in the sorts of questions that people look at.
There are people looking at
few.
These things. Okay.
Sort of the developmental aspects. Are young children as much driven by their eyes, or do they rely more on taste of things initially?
And so, for example, we had this experiment with the Skittles, the jelly beans. How does that? Do you know how people that have no smell, how do they react to this experiment?
So the irony is, if you ask people just hypothetically, which sense would you least like to lose? It's kind of your eyes, isn't it? I don't want to go blind. Yeah. No one says I don't want to lose my sense of smell. And yet those who do lose their sense of smell, that becomes the highest risk of suicide of any group. Because if you're blind, you can still imagine what people used to look like, and you can see their face of your wife or partner for at least for a couple of years. Whereas at smell, we don't realize how important it is in the mating behaviors, but also in the enjoyment of food. Yeah. When that goes, it seems to take away the whole emotional bit of life. So very bad in a way. Takes the pleasure of living away, loses emotional connection. Though I have seen in the papers recently some of those sort of self-help guides to eat less. And the cheapest, the best, the easiest solution recommended by the British newspapers a couple of weeks ago was to wear a clothes peg at mealtimes.
Well, that's fair. Okay, and then we have another question, this time for Vicky. And I think before I ask the question, I should actually, it seems like it's a bit warm here, so there's a couple of glasses and waters and 2 bottles of wine, so you guys seem thirsty. So let's... So let me give you a couple of glasses. So here, Carlos. And I'll put this one there. Second. Vicky? Now
I'm nervous.
Well, that's the objective, is we've been trying to release a bit this... Okay, so we are... How many are we? I cannot even count. 6, and there are 4 classes, so I'll put another one and I'll drink water. I need to keep my... Okay, there we go. So Vicky. Do you think, is there any evolutionary advantage for babies to enjoy some food when that their mothers also do? So you've showed that babies tend to enjoy the food that their mothers eat while they are pregnant. Is there an evolutionary advantage of that?
Actually, that's a very interesting question, and I had never thought of it, but actually, at least there's, as Hedi has shown, there's a preference for sweet taste, and that has an evolutionary advantage because it shows that food is rich in taste, but if I have to be sincere right now, I cannot think of an evolutionary reason. You made me nervous with the wine glasses, so...
Okay, any other comments on that?
I suppose the main idea is that, right, I mean, if you were born, right, and your mother was eating the right things, you actually went to that experience. So it was a good experience, right? Yeah. So you kind of reinforces the idea, or it propagates the idea that that the selection of a specific food is eventually going to be good on the long term. I think that's a general idea of why there is this so-called transgenerational inheritance of this preference.
Must be something about as well whether which of those initial taste preferences, if we only come into the world with a response to tastes, as you showed from the faces, yeah, but no responses or very few responses innate to smells. We have to learn whether we like them, whether they're paired with the caffeine and so on. Whether then that sort of the newborn's liking for sweet taste and umami, does that come from the in utero tasting? Mm-hmm. Is it just familiarity that we come into the world with, or something else?
That's true. So a couple of reasons at least. Well, speculative reasons, I guess. Yeah, so this question actually applies to a couple of you, but this is directed to Hedi. So you're a scientist, you're a food lover. Can you design an experiment with foods? Or if you could design an experiment with food, have it in a restaurant, out of the top of your head, what would you design? It's a tough one, though. No pressure.
Really putting me on the spot there. To design an experiment with food, well, I'm not sure how I would go about it. Actually, we were discussing a dinner. So a lot of work has been done in epileptic patients during their surgeries. Often the surgeon will stimulate different parts of their brains. And fascinatingly, for example, if surgeons stimulate a part of their brain, they can actually cause the patient to feel the urge to move their left arm. And if they increase the stimulation, they can actually just move their left arm. And so I would be very curious to know what would happen if a surgeon was to activate, stimulate the primary gustatory cortex, and would they be able to elicit flavors in the patient? Would the patient be able to taste chocolate without anything in his or her mouth, just from brain stimulation? A bit similar to the experiment that was done in the mice that I showed you, where they were able to trick the mouse into thinking it was tasting something bitter when it was not. So I would love to do that experiment in humans.
Well, I think you find of the gourmand syndrome, these patients who've never been interested in food in all their lives and then have some brain damage. I'm not sure it's the insula or quite where it is. And then suddenly they discover a love for fine dining and food. And suddenly their life gets taken over by thinking about eating at the nice restaurants, talking about cooking.
Right. Yeah. Actually, I don't know. I mean, this is actually something I was curious to know what... it was fascinating to see how the different senses combine to form this unified perception of flavor. And I was wondering how much is known about where that happens in the brain. For example, in the orbitofrontal cortex, which is that area that chocolate lovers, it's more active in chocolate lovers when they're tasting and seeing chocolate. In that area, they've actually found in monkeys cells that respond not just to taste, but also to the sight of food or to the smell of food. So these are multimodal neurons in the front of the monkey's brains. And is that area thought to be where this combination of senses occurs?
Certainly one of them, for the texture of foods, kind of the rewarding mouthfeel of fatty foods seems to be combined with the sight and the smell there in the OFC. Maybe so the question for us is building on what's emerging of the brain network for normal food perception, then is something like the sonic seasoning. Do you see an increase in activation, say, in those sort of sweet neurons, as has been shown when you tell people, this is going to be a really sweet wine? Yeah. And again, you can see the verbal instruction can actually change sort of primary taste responses. As yet, we don't know if the same would be true from a musical induction or whether it's by a different route.
So this has been done with fMRI now?
First study just presented at a conference in June in Toronto by a Japanese group.
Okay, and what were the results?
It's a bit hard to follow.
Okay, so maybe let's switch this again to the restaurant and the dishes. And someone is asking, what are the methods that you use to discover the new dishes, to plan, design these new dishes? And it's actually a bunch of questions related to the same topic. So, what are the methods or the process that you go through to come up with a new dish? Do you try a lot? Do you abandon a lot of these dishes that do not end as you like? How does it work?
Yes, we try a lot, but at the moment, more important than that, it's how you can change the mindset of the client. A family dish have the same flavor when you are sad or you are happy, or the same wine have the same flavor with different companions. So we think about it every time in local, and imagine a restaurant like Loco with 7 tables and 20 seats, and the best chefs you can have, and the best ingredients. Mm-hmm. And we have the correct point of seasoning and the correct point of texture, and you cook for the client, and the 21 dishes, and you cooked and you put just in the front of the clients, and they hit the best ingredients cooked by the best chefs. And the same restaurant in a different week with good chefs, but not so good with the first ones, and good products, but not so good like the first ones. But every time you put a dish in front of the client, you put the dish in context, and you tell a story about the dish and why it's served in that moment, and we have the best experience. What is important? It's just have a dish and hit the dish, or have a history behind the dish. And we think about it every time. And perhaps if you have the best chefs and the best ingredients, and if you tell a history or put everything in context, perhaps you can be one of the best restaurants in the world. And for us now, that part is more important than the why or how you can find a new dish, or how we do it. So.
And so now that you've worked for a very long time in producing these new dishes, experimenting with food, does it change the way that you experience food when you go to a different restaurant?
Yes, I try to be free when I go to a new restaurant. I not to think in food. Okay.
Okay. Are you very critic of the food that you get at the
yes,
restaurant?
in the beginning. Now I
so you try to enjoy.
Yes, I just enjoying.
So this allows you still to enjoy your food.
Yeah, because it's a different approach. Now I work just 4 or 5 days per week, and the other days I go out aboard to find new products, to find new techniques, to diving, and now we do a work about the level of the waters of the ocean. It's for us the most important. It's what sits behind the water, not it's on the surface.
So, yeah, that's great. And like, what about you, Charles? Because you understand how taste works. Does it change the way that you?
I'm curious about the cocktail that you guys were making. So this is something you've created and come up with, and your response on tasting it was, perfectly balanced. The flavors match and the aroma. You had the idea for this drink, a new combination of ingredients. How did you decide on the final formula? So as a scientist, maybe we'd want to test hundreds or thousands of people to say that's the right test. In the restaurant, is it more your palate? Do you say, I trust that, or is it the team of chefs, or do you try it on the guests?
No, we have a test kitchen, and that recipe we do it, I don't know, maybe 100 times until the final.
But who decides if it's good or bad?
Me. I decide. It's my restaurant.
Very well.
I decide that. Yeah. If it's good for me, it's good for my clients, and that's it.
So, but I guess with one sample point, you're expecting to also to have some people disliking it, right? Like not everyone can have exactly the same taste as you do.
I think it's normal.
Yeah.
We have a menu with 21 dishes, so if you don't like 3 or 4 or 5 or 21, yeah, it's your opinion.
Yeah.
For us, it's perfect. So you're wrong.
And for many chefs, it seems if you ask what are they about, and it's about my aim is to deliver delicious dishes, and this is what the science should try and help in some way to deliver those delicious tasting dishes. But chefs like Chef Andoni from Mugaritz, in an interview recently said, no, I don't want to create delicious dishes, I want to create interesting dishes. I'm wondering, where do you sit on that?
It's a hard part because now we can do it in local, but in the beginning we cannot. But now, for us, the most important part it's the flavor. If the dish is ugly or beauty, we don't care about it. But the important part is the flavor. It's we have 3 desserts without sugar at the moment, so it's hard to explain to a client that our desserts don't have sugar. What? Come on, it's a Portuguese restaurant. Why don't have sugar and eggs? And yeah, because we have to work with legumes and that's it. But it's our way to do it. That's why local. It's a small restaurant with just on 7 tables. So if it's a restaurant with 20 tables or 30 tables, it's impossible to do it in Portugal at the moment, I think.
So we're getting a lot of questions regarding the video, apparently. And Carlos, do you see any kind of collaboration, or do you envision any kind of collaboration that, do you feel the lab could be useful for developing these new experiences that we're discussing?
So unfortunately, due to time length, right, we couldn't show everything we did.
It's true.
And actually, I did another dish in loco, and also Alexandre did another experiment in the lab. And I think that one was very interesting. So the dish I did in loco was called the most tender steak in the world. And Can I give it away? Okay. So what actually was prepared was actually a beef tongue, which was, however, prepared in a way that you really thought at the beginning that it was really the most tender steak. And so Alexandre managed to create this illusion that what you were eating was a steak, but actually it was not a steak. And in the lab, right, we can nowadays do something similar where we can turn on neurons just with light and let the animal, in our case flies, think that they're eating sugar or bitter or protein when actually this is purely virtual and it's just due to light activations. And I think in that sense I found remarkable how actually the ideas and the experiments end up being very similar. Obviously the goal in one case is to give a memorable experience, a pleasure to the customer, and ours is try to find out what goes on in the brain of the animal. But I think that there is a lot to learn. And for example, one thing I really keep on being reminded when I work with chefs is that, so in the lab, we try to minimize and to simplify things as much as possible so we can understand them. And we work a lot with sensory experience, so with taste especially. But we think about it very elementary as just taste for protein or just taste for sugar, right? And it's very clear from what you experienced today with the Skittles, right? But also in general, that flavor at the end is what our brain perceives in terms of food. And I feel always that that's something which we haven't yet managed to really bring into the lab in terms of really how is sensory information perceived and processed in the brain, because we already struggle to understand one sensory channel, that to start to mix multiple things is kind of a bit beyond. But we know that it's important, right? Because in our flies, if we also turn off smell, they will not be able to perceive protein the same way, and if we turn on taste, it's the same thing. But yeah, so people in my lab here, right, we need to think more about flavor. I think we need to develop some more experiments about that. Yeah.
So you're planning to change now a bit to human side as well?
I think that's another aspect, right? It's inspiration, but also obviously we now have found a lot of interesting things, and one of the great things about working with flies is that a lot of the genes we have are the same genes in flies, and a lot of the genes which we find are important in the brain of the fly to tell the fly, oh, eat protein when you're pregnant, or eat salt, or is telling the fly you don't have enough protein. We actually find them also in humans, and we also find them in the brain of humans. And so obviously we cannot take them out in humans, but obviously we can go into the mouse now and take out that gene and see if, for example, now we can make a mouse think it needs protein when actually it does not. So this link between what we do in the lab in basic research and trying to translate that obviously to everyday lab, first of all in other organisms and ultimately also in the ecological setting, as you said, is obviously something we try. But it's a long-term process, right? We're not talking about 2 years, we're talking about 10 years, right, or longer.
So regarding these tricks, there is an interesting question here. It's to trick the minds, do we always need to add chemicals? And I think, I don't know who asked this question, maybe you can come up on stage. We have something interesting here that I think you can taste. Come on up. And so, do you want to answer, or should I go ahead and just let her try? So, it's true that many of these things that Charles has shown, they need chemicals, or they add some chemicals to change the taste. But there are natural flavors as well, and so I can let you choose. So this is a cheese leaf, and this is an oyster leaf. So
okay,
you can choose either or. Like choose one, pick one. And you can just eat it.
eat it.
Yes. I would advise this one, but it's okay.
Okay.
Okay, so can I get the mic maybe? Yeah. So what does it taste like?
It's just
So it smells
bitter.
It's just bitter. Okay.
Yeah.
What does it like? It smells
Tastes a little cheesy.
Okay, so it does taste a little cheesy. So this is just, maybe I should have shown it before. So this is just a normal leaf, but it does have the taste of cheese, or the aftertaste of cheese. And it really smells a lot like cheese. I'll close the box.
Horrible.
And it tastes horrible. Okay, so I think it's bad cheese, but it does taste like cheese. And we will have a couple of these outside as well for you to taste. There's not many, so it's first come, first served. So let's try not to rush out the door also. Thank you. So, yeah, go on.
So in this case, we have these sort of natural products. Leaves, so the oyster leaves growing, I think, on the coasts of Scotland.
Yes,
but they can be served in a modernist or a molecular restaurant, and that is a dish at 20 euros in some restaurants. It's just one of those leaves. And in that context of the transformed, the molecular, the chemical, what can this thing be? And it's almost like you can't believe it can just be a natural thing, and yet the chefs can play with natural ingredients that you can't really... You imagine there must be a lot of science going on to deliver an oyster tasting leaf that has no oysters in it, naturally.
Yeah. Well, so I think we will end with a kind of a fun question. Oh, no, I have a mic. So we will end with a fun question. And let me see how they put it exactly. There's way too many. But... what was it called? Okay, so there you think. Do you think that smell vision is possible? Like, would that increase the experience that people have when... So, a television that just emits some smells?
Yep.
Or odors? Is that something you see happening?
Technology exists.
Okay.
And there have been versions of smell-o-vision since the 50s and 60s.
Okay.
They never quite caught on, they never quite worked. And those initially, I guess, were like technical limitations that once you had the smell like the cheese.
Like now.
I can still smell the cheese, but maybe it's time for the next smell.
Maybe
I don't want the cheese
box.
when I'm having something else. So there are kind of technical limits there. But now you have plugins for your mobile phone that will deliver scent. But the problem is most of those things will only deliver one scent. Mm-hmm. So I'm watching a movie, I might want multiple scents to go with different scenes, and you can't do that easily as yet. And going beyond that,
does it make sense to you?
Yeah, definitely. I've done a few like sort of secret cinema events where a chef or a food artist may pick some dishes to match the action on the screen, and sometimes so that you're eating the same food that the character's eating on the screen. Other times, giving you something to eat that makes you aroused and tense to match the emotion. So there are different kinds of connections you can make. But I think so far it's mostly in real foods being delivered in the cinema. And those, I mean, there are people out there who'd love to have this idea of digital smell, where I can deliver smells down the internet, and I can put a couple of those electrodes up your nose, and just if I press the right frequency, you'll smell the cheese, the oyster.
Lab, right?
But it turns out you can kind of do that for taste, but smell doesn't work that way, so it's impossible to deliver that kind of digital smell in a way that so many scientists would love. But the idea behind it that by adding smell, adding one sense to the experience, be it in the restaurant or in the cinema, I think can deliver more.
So people have tried this digital smell, it just doesn't
The ultimate
work.
challenge, though, is would you pay for the refill? So I know people have done, for the World Cup, you can get a plug-in for your TV that releases the smell of fresh-cut grass. So you see the footballers, you can smell the grass, you're almost there. And I can measure how much did you enjoy the game? How great was the football? Yes. With smell, it's better. But then the cartridge runs out, and you attribute your pleasure to the action you saw on the screen.
Yeah.
You think, smell? No, I didn't really notice it after the first few minutes. So while you can demonstrate as a scientist that the smell helps, how do you make sure that the diner or the viewer
sticks with it,
attributes their pleasure to the right thing? And I don't know if we have a solution for that.
All right, so I think we're out of time. Before we go, I just want to thank a few organizations that helped us. There you go. That helped us organizing the event. So the art team here that did a fantastic job putting together the presentations, helping us out discussing these presentations, and all the little bags that you had throughout the event, they were the ones packing it up. Then, of course, the Champalimaud Foundation for having us here and always allowing us to host these events in this amazing auditorium. Local for hosting us there for the incredible day that we had during the shooting of the event. And then ReFood. So we didn't talk about ReFood until now. We will have a stand outside, but ReFood is an institution here in Lisbon that collects food that would otherwise go to waste and tries to reutilize it to feed people that are not as fortunate as us, that can have food on the table every single day. So with this, I would like again to thank you, Alexandre, Charles, Carlos, and of course Vicky and Hedi for this amazing event, and thank you all for having here. Please, before you leave, take your paper bags so that we don't have a lot of garbage here, and you can just drop them outside. There's food and drinks. Help us just have fun outside as well. Thank you. Obrigado. Charles, thanks a lot.